Warning: this episode contains references and mentions of sexual assault and incest. Viewer discretion is advised. Lot. The story.
Lot is the son of Haran, the nephew of Abram, later Abraham, and Sarai, later Sarah, the cousin of Sarah's son Isaac, and Hagar's son Ishmael, the husband of an unnamed woman, and the father of 2 unnamed daughters. Lot was from Ur and lived in Haran. He was a herdsman and shepherd, working alongside his uncle Abraham. He followed his uncle and auntie on their journey to Canaan after God called Abraham to do so. Sometime after the three returned to the area between Bethel and Ai, succeeding their travels to Negev in Egypt. By this point, Lot and his uncle had become exceedingly wealthy. Trouble arose between each other's workers due to the land being too small for both. Abraham and Lot decided to part ways. Lot took everything he had and settled in the valley of the Jordan, in Sodom. After Lot and his family and all his possessions had moved into Sodom, a war broke out in the area involving many, if not all, towns and cities, including Sodom. The army of Sodom was one of the cities defeated, and their king, Bera, was killed. Sodom was ravaged for anything worthwhile, and those still alive were taken prisoner. Lot, his family, and his possessions were part of those captured. When Abraham heard that his nephew was one of those captured, he assembled the 380 battle-ready men he had, joined them, and rescued Lot. After setting Lot, his family, and his possessions free, Lot and company returned and settled back in Sodom. 2 of the 3 strangers that visited Abraham and Sarah at their camp travelled to Sodom, arriving in the evening. Lot was sitting at the city gate. He saw the 2 men approaching and greeted them, bowing before them with his face to the ground. The 2 strangers politely rejected Lot's invitation to spend the night at his home. However, after he strongly insisted, they accepted. After washing and eating the feast and unleavened bread Lot prepared for them, the 2 men headed off to bed. Yet outside the house, the men of Sodom, both old and young, had surrounded the premises. Before the 2 men could lie down, they, Lot, Lot's wife and 2 daughters, heard the men outside aggressively and loudly calling for Lot, demanding he bring the 2 visitors to them so they could have relations with them. Lot exited the house alone and tried negotiating with them. He offered his 2 daughters to the men of Sodom in place of the 2 visitors. The men of Sodom were having none of Lot's proposal and now tried to force their way into his home. However, the 2 guests rescued Lot, shut the door, and struck those outside with blindness. The 2 who had now revealed themselves to be angels explained to Lot and his family God's plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and God's plan to save them from this fate. After this, Lot informed his daughter's fiancés but couldn't convince them to join. The sun was rising and Lot and his family were hesitant to leave, even though the 2 angels had confirmed it was time for God to act. So the angels took the 4 by the hand and rushed them outside the city wall, telling them to flee to the mountains and don't look back. Yet Lot begged them to let the 4 flee to a small town close by called Zoar. They agreed. Lot and his family fled to Zoar, and God rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, killing all their inhabitants. Lot's wife couldn't resist the urge to look at what was happening, instantly turning into a pillar of salt because she disobeyed the angel's command. Sometime after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot felt unsafe in Zoar and settled in a cave in the mountains nearby with his 2 daughters. While in the cave, the oldest daughter decided the only way to continue their family was for her to conceive through her father, and her younger sister to do the same. That night and the following night, the 2 sisters got their father Lot drunk. On the first, the oldest conceived. On the second, the youngest conceived, both through their father, both times without his knowledge. The oldest sister named her son Moab. The youngest named her son Ben-ammi. Moab's descendants would become the Moabites. Ben-ammi's descendants would become the sons of Ammon, the Ammonites. Digging deeper. We'll look at the descendants of Lot's daughter's sons, Moab and Ben-ammi, the Moabites and the Ammonites. The Moabites have an interesting relationship with God and the Israelites. They are enemies of the Israelites, being polytheistic pagans, yet used by God for his own redemptive purposes. The Moabites are next mentioned in Numbers 21 through chapter 25:1. Chapters 22 to 24 is the story of Balak and Balaam cursing Israel with God turning it into blessings. Chapter 21 introduces the Moabites, and chapter 25 verse 1 records the Israelites having intimate relationships with the Moabite people, which displeased God, concluding this unfavorable depiction of the Moabite people in the eyes of God. Yet in Deuteronomy 2:9, God tells Moses to leave Moab alone, and the biblical figure Ruth was a Moabite, whose child would continue the family line leading to Jesus. Incidences in Scripture where the Moabites are seen in a positive light, all adding to the complicated relationship between the Moabites and the Israelites. The Ammonites, the descendants of Lot's younger daughter's son Ben-ammi, were people hostile toward God and the Israelites. They were polytheistic pagans. They were also giants. Again, like the Moabites, God commanded Moses to leave them alone in Deuteronomy 2:19. This didn't last in later books of the Old Testament, including both Samuel's, 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Amos, recorded an active hostility between the two nations. The only positive interaction between the two is found in 1 Kings 11:1, when Solomon marries an Ammonite woman, also a Moabite woman too. This, however, wasn't as positive as it seemed, since these two nations were part of God's forbade marriages and caused Solomon to turn from following God and instead follow the gods of their nations. I'd like to finish this section with a segment from Zephaniah 2:9 that shows God's opinion on the Moabites and the Ammonites. Surely Moab will be like Sodom, and the sons of Ammon like Gomorrah, a place possessed by needles and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The remnant of my people will plunder them, and the remainder of my nation will inherit them. What to learn? What should we take away from the story of Lot? I believe it teaches us the importance of trusting in God's faithfulness and being obedient to his commands, and explores humanity's continued descent into sinfulness. After God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, as their sinful nature and behaviour had gone too far, he did spare those living in both who were faithful and followed his ways. Lot and his family were the only ones faithful and loyal to God. Both Jesus and Peter sympathetically discuss Lot. Jesus in Luke 17:29-32, and Peter in his second letter in chapter 2 verses 7 and 8. Jesus in Luke 17:32 briefly references Lot's wife, alluding to her disobedience at the command not to look back, given by the two angels on behalf of God, turning into a pillar of salt. I believe Jesus added this because even though God will be faithful and protect those who trust and follow his ways, he will allow them to face the consequences if they disobey. However, the story of Lot and his family also demonstrates humans' continued sinful nature, with Lot and his family not being perfect. When the men of Sodom visited Lot's house to abuse his two guests, Lot offered his two daughters in their place. Again, as mentioned before, Lot's wife's disobedience. Finally, Lot's daughters both abused their father in the cave they were living in, after fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah. Despite this, Lot is remembered and seen as righteous. The same applies to us today. Even when we fail and mess up, God is willing and faithful to redeem those who trust and follow him and his ways.